What happens when hip-hop's biggest night meets its biggest feud? What happens when one of hip-hop's most influential women publicly challenges one of its most powerful men on the biggest night in music? When money, loyalty, and decades of unspoken industry politics collide, who actually tells the truth? And who controls the story? Because what unfolded between Nicki Minaj and Jay-Z on February 1st, 2026, didn't just dominate Grammy headlines. It reopened years of unresolved tension that now threatens to reshape how fans see power, business, and influence in the entertainment industry. To understand why this moment exploded, we have to step back, trace the origins of the conflict, and explore not just the events themselves, but the motivations, the personalities, and the systemic forces at play. The Grammy Night Outburst. The night of the 68th Grammy Awards promised glitz, glamour, and a celebration of the year's biggest musical achievements. Millions tuned in across TV screens and streaming platforms, anticipating performances, award reveals, and the playful banter of host Trevor Noah. But for a brief moment, the spectacle became secondary to a very real human drama. Nicki Minaj, one of the most decorated female rappers of her generation, launched a multi-hour social media tirade targeting Jay-Z. Posts, videos, and cryptic threads flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, accusing him of financial betrayal, career sabotage, and personal misconduct. Fans and insiders alike were stunned. The trigger, according to Nicki, wasn't Jay-Z himself but a seemingly innocuous joke by Trevor Noah, referencing her absence and her recent political commentary. She interpreted it as symbolic of years of disrespect, a tiny spark lighting a powder keg. Her timing was strategic, some argued. The Grammys represented more than awards. They were a stage. And when celebrities finally explode in public, the timing often tells a story. Was it frustration? A calculated move? Or both? Questions arose immediately. Why would Nicki choose music's biggest night to air grievances? And when someone like Nicki Minaj breaks silence so publicly, is it a window into hidden truths or just the boiling over of years-long frustration? The Tidal deal that started it all. To understand the roots of the conflict, we must rewind to 2015. That year, Jay-Z relaunched Tidal, presenting it as an artist-owned alternative to Spotify and Apple Music. The vision was compelling, a platform that empowered artists with ownership and control rather than letting corporate tech giants dominate their content. At a press event in New York, Jay-Z announced 16 superstar artists as co-owners, including Beyonce, Rihanna, Kanye West, Madonna, J. Cole, and Nicki Minaj. Each artist reportedly received a 3% equity stake in exchange for exclusive content, promotion, and helping grow the platform. It was a groundbreaking promise, the kind that could reshape the music industry. Nicki actively supported Tidal. She released the video for Feeling Myself exclusively on the platform and publicly encouraged fans to subscribe. She spoke about the platform as if it were hers, reinforcing the idea that artists finally had a voice in an industry long dominated by executives and corporations. Then, in 2021, Jay-Z sold Tidal to Square, now Block, for approximately $297 to $302 million. That's when the story fractured. Nicki claimed she was offered only $1 million from the deal, alleging she was told Tidal made no profit. Media outlets reported that artists received roughly $8.9 million each, a figure Nicki rejected. She insisted that the $1 million offer was hush money, an attempt to silence her. This leads to a crucial question. If artists were truly co-owners, why didn't everyone walk away equally? And if contracts existed, why have they never been made public? By mid-2025, Nicki escalated her demand to $200 million, calling it karmic debt, money she claimed she would use to support fans with tuition, student loans, and other forms of direct assistance. Yet industry executives, including Steve Stout, suggested that many artists never signed formal shareholder agreements, meaning the promises were symbolic rather than legally binding. This is where the tension between trust and law becomes glaring. When handshake deals collide with corporate contracts, who wins? The spirit of the agreement or the letter of the law? Nicki's perspective was personal. She felt betrayed. Legally, she may have had little recourse. The paperwork dispute. The public filings showed that Tidal's holding company remained primarily controlled by Jay-Z, with no documented evidence of shared ownership among the announced artists. In essence, Nicki may have believed in equity she never legally possessed. Critics argued that if Nicki's claims were strong, she would have filed a lawsuit long ago. Her counterargument was simple. The public signing event itself constituted agreement, and Jay-Z, along with Roc Nation CEO Desiree Perez, had allegedly withheld access and spread misinformation regarding artist returns. This dispute wasn't unique. Kanye West sued Tidal for $3 million in unpaid bonuses tied to the life of Pablo, settling privately. The precedent suggested that disputes over artist compensation were real, even if the details remained shrouded in secrecy. For Nicki, the Tidal issue became more than business. It became personal. And personal stakes in the music industry rarely stay private for long. The Super Bowl controversy. By 2024, Nicki's grievances expanded beyond finances. She publicly accused Jay-Z of blocking Lil Wayne from performing at the Super Bowl halftime show. Jay-Z, as the NFL's live music entertainment strategist, had significant influence over which artists were selected. Fans and insiders debated the legitimacy of the accusation. Was it a logistical decision, or was it a cultural snub? Nicki's framing was clear. She saw betrayal, not oversight. For her, Wayne was not just an artist but a mentor, a pivotal figure in her career. Birdman, co-founder of Cash Money Records, publicly supported Nicki, amplifying the narrative that Wayne had been disrespected. Social media exploded with questions. Who decides which artists receive these iconic moments? Is influence concentrated in a few hands? Nicki's perception of sabotage extended to her own career. She accused Roc Nation of interfering with tours, including lack of promotion for her Pink Friday 2 tour, hinting at nepotism within Live Nation and Roc Nation structures. By now, fans were asking themselves, when does perceived injustice become fact? And when do frustrations, magnified through decades of systemic bias, blur into conspiracy? Claims of industry sabotage. Nicki further alleged that her 2024 arrest in Amsterdam for marijuana possession wasn't random, suggesting it was orchestrated retaliation. She urged her followers to document moments when they were flagged or suspended online, claiming systematic suppression. This created a social dilemma. Critics questioned, if Roc Nation truly controlled narratives, wouldn't Beyonce, arguably the most visible Roc Nation artist, be immune from criticism first? Nicki's logic implied everything connected. Tidal, the Super Bowl, social suppression. But external observers noticed inconsistencies and gaps in evidence. Still, from Nicki's perspective, the world she navigated was hostile. And for fans witnessing this, the question became, when someone feels targeted by powerful institutions, how do we separate genuine injustice from emotional exhaustion? The Beat dispute and Beyoncé's role. The narrative inevitably pulled Beyonce into the story. In October 2025, Nicki posted allegations that a beat from her 2018 album Queen had been claimed for Beyonce under Jay-Z's direction. She claimed she was later sued for producing a similar track. No public lawsuit confirmed the claim. No producers verified it. Jay-Z and Beyonce remained silent. Yet Nicki's post went viral, igniting debates across social platforms and creating intense fan friction. Despite the flare-ups, evidence suggested goodwill remained. Beyonce had sent flowers to Nicki in March 2025, celebrating her tour, a gesture Nicki shared positively. They had collaborated on Feeling Myself in 2015, a track symbolizing mutual respect during a peak period for both artists. The tension prompted a critical question. When two women remain silent while powerful men battle publicly, who absorbs the fallout, and who escapes scrutiny? Paternity case allegations. Nicki further stoked controversy by reposting content about Jay-Z's alleged son, Rymir Satterthwaite, whose paternity claim had been dismissed in January 2026. Nicki insinuated wrongdoing, including unsubstantiated claims against Beyonce, raising serious ethical concerns. Here, the broader debate emerged. When celebrities amplify unverified allegations, how do we measure accountability? When does reputational harm become irreversible? Psychology of a public breakdown. By February 2026, Nicki's accusations ranged from business disputes to personal vendettas and systemic suppression. Fans were polarized. Some viewed her as brave, a whistleblower. Others saw paranoia. Some perceived a breakdown. Others saw a principled stand against entrenched power. Yet one truth remained. Emotionally, Nicki believed she was fighting an industry system designed to erase her. Whether that belief aligned with reality mattered less than the conviction itself, and the cultural reverberations were undeniable. Her public breakdown raised enduring questions. What is the cost of silence in an industry built on power and visibility? And when a titan of hip-hop is challenged by someone with equal reach, how does the narrative shift for the audience, the media, and the industry itself? Part 1. The money flood no one expected. Expanded. What happens when someone feels unheard for years, then finally speaks, and their words detonate across an ecosystem built on silence? What happens when the message becomes too explosive to trust? These are not rhetorical flourishes. They are the structural questions at the heart of the story that unfolded on Grammy night. A night that began as another industry ritual and ended as a wide-open fracture. That evening, the lights were bright and the cameras wider than ever. Celebrities floated down staircases that had been carefully built as stages for the nation's attention. An audience that had been trained by decades of spectacle leaned forward. But social media, which had once only augmented the performance, now had its own agency. It could interrupt, amplify, and reroute. When Nicki Minaj's absence, an absence notable because of several nominations and the expectation of spectacle, met Trevor Noah's offhand joke about her being at the White House with Donald Trump, the result was a spark that did not extinguish. The spark became a torch. What follows is not a catalog of verified facts. It is an expanded telling, a narrative reconstruction that remains faithful to the original sequence of posts, reactions, and silences while probing deeper into motives, structures, and the human costs that celebrity feuds often leave behind. The first fuse. At 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the world watched the awards show as usual. Cameras cut between artists and presenters as producers squeezed every second of emotional cadence out of the telecast. Trevor Noah's joke landed in an arena wired for laughter. Jokes about politics and pop culture have always been the ceremony's safe fuel. They keep the conversation moving. But jokes are brittle in an era where the audience carries microphones in their pockets. The moment the hosts joked about Minaj's political pivot, she responded not with a publicist-crafted statement but online, in real time. Sharp, personal, and unsparing. A missing awards appearance had become a political signal. A joke had become a provocation, and the provocation opened a door no one could close. The question that lingered then was a simple one. If someone chooses not to appear on stage, are they making a private decision, or issuing a public statement? And when the person in question responds directly on social media, how should the audience interpret the tone and the intent? When tweets become testimonies. Minaj's posts unfolded like a performance piece written in fragments. Each post functioned both as an accusation and as a provocation. The allegation against Trevor Noah, the cryptic images implying knowledge among industry insiders, the pivot to Jay-Z and the recycled rumors tied to past relationships, and the escalating adoption of conspiracy-laden framing. The timeline was relentless. At 9 p.m., the online conversation reached a fevered pitch. Memes, doctored screenshots, and long-form threads proliferated. Accusations that had once circulated in whispered rap culture rumor mills surfaced with a velocity and reach previously impossible. They were neither neutral nor purely informational. They carried an effective weight that made readers feel like participants. But what does it mean when the medium of the message changes the message itself? A rumor shared in a late-night interview can be framed as gossip. The same rumor tweeted by a megastar becomes a public allegation. Is there a moral difference between the two? Is there a legal one? Does the law, built for evidence and courts, adequately police a space designed for sensation and virality? Echoes without evidence. The most wrenching detail in this saga is procedural. Despite the cascade of accusations, there were no victims who came forward publicly, no civil suits filed, and no criminal charges levied in connection to the claims that spread that night. The internet, hungry for resolution, filled the vacuum with speculation, reinterpretation, and moral certainty. Why would someone level explosive claims without presenting traditional evidence? Some reasons are personal and immediate. Anger, revenge, a desire to force attention onto grievances that had been ignored. Some are structural. Social media rewards spectacle. Governments and courts move slowly. But there is another possibility worth considering. Perhaps the claims were intentionally performative. What if the posts were a strategic attack designed to destabilize a set of relationships, to shift leverage in private negotiations, or to force an opponent to reveal strategy through their silence? If so, then the performance had a dual life. One public, one private. Does silence in response to such a provocation constitute guilt or strategy? Which silence protects, and which silences provoke? ## the strange law of non-litigation. Legal action is often a blunt instrument in celebrity disputes. Lawsuits bring discovery. Discovery forces the exchange of documents, depositions, and emails. Exactly the sorts of materials that powerful people may prefer to keep private. Litigation can become a two-way sword. While it promises vindication, it also risks exposing inconvenient truths. So why did neither side litigate? Among the possible explanations are legal uncertainty, no clear cause of action based on the published posts, the risk that litigation would subject private business dealings to public scrutiny, the enormous cost of protracted civil fights, and the possibility of private negotiations and settlements that never become public. Legal experts often tell creators that winning in court is not the same as winning in public. And in this case, the calculus of restraint seemed to override the appetite for resolution. Silence can be strategic. One does not have to interpret it as capitulation. ## a duel between models of power. At its core, beyond the roar of accusations and the hush of non-response, this feud reads like a symbolic struggle between two models of success that have existed in modern hip-hop. The artist as entrepreneur and the artist as asset within corporate structures. Nicki Minaj rose in an era where raw attention translated into cultural capital, but not always into ownership. Her narrative is that of many artists who gained global audiences while still being contractually constrained. They performed as stars but were not always beneficiaries of the business architecture they helped build. Jay-Z's story is different, or so the narrative goes. He migrated from classic artist to corporate architect, building empires and aligning with institutions that extract value at scale. Where Nicki's fight seemed to be about voice and recognition, Jay-Z's apparent posture suggested a defense of structure and legacy. Is the fight then about money or something deeper? Control over narrative, cultural patrimony, the right to define how history will remember artists and the industry that house them. If legacy is the asset, then legacy protection is as strategic as any legal maneuver. ## the fans as actors. If institutions and contracts were the visible actors on a chessboard, fans functioned as the kinetic energy. Moving, rearranging, reinforcing. Fan communities became tribes, and tribal affiliation often predicted which account of events would be accepted as true. Nicki's fanbase rallied. They read her as a wronged artist, robbed not only of money but of recognition. For them, she was the whistleblower who dared to name names. Jay-Z's backers read differently. They saw instability, public grandstanding, and a leveling up of rumor into accusation. How should we understand these fan reactions? When fandom becomes identity, are fans simply defending an artist's oeuvre, or are they engaged in a larger political act of belonging? And when fate and rumor sit together on the same timeline, can objectivity survive the partisan impulse to defend one's tribe above all else? ## the media machinery. Traditional journalists and tabloid engines both fed the fire in different modes. Established news outlets tended to frame the story as an unverified social media storm, emphasizing the lack of legal corroboration. Tabloid and entertainment sites, meanwhile, amplified the most sensational content because it guaranteed clicks. This bifurcated media response is important because it maps onto the public's cognitive load. Some readers wanted nuance, others wanted outrage. The internet, impressively, provided both simultaneously. But the deeper question is structural. Do our contemporary media incentives reward resolution or momentum? Do stories that refuse to be resolved, because there is no litigation, no clear evidence, have an advantage in the attention economy because ambiguity fuels continued engagement? If so, then ambiguity itself becomes a product. ## the politics of public pivots. Minaj's political pivot, from critic to supporter of Donald Trump, complicated how audiences read her accusations. Critics accused her of inconsistency. How could someone condemn certain figures in one moment and embrace them in another? Supporters argued that her path reflected principled positions about specific issues, such as religious freedom in certain countries. The pivot also exposed a paradox of celebrity politics. When entertainers enter political life, their prior actions and statements are retroactively reinterpreted, and their legitimacy becomes a political tool for others. Minaj's appearance at America Fest and her White House visit were treated as evidence of alignment. Her subsequent rhetoric was interpreted through that lens. How should audiences weigh a celebrity's political transformation against their personal grievances? Are personal narratives fungible when they become political capital? ## the anatomy of an online mass. There is something remarkable about how quickly the online public assembled itself during the storm. Opinionated threads, deeply edited clips, screenshotted DM hints, and crowdsourcing of corroboration. The collective intelligence of the web became a jury in absentia. Yet crowdsourcing is not synonymous with truth. Mass attention can manufacture its own reality by virtue of volume alone. When millions of people amplify a claim, the claim accrues a gravitational pull that makes it feel real even when it turns out to be baseless. So what is the responsibility of a public when encountering explosive allegations online? Should readers be moral gatekeepers, parsing evidence before amplifying? Or is their role simply to react, to feel, and to reshare? ## the human costs. Behind the performative posts and the polarized comment sections are human beings who experience real consequences. Reputation is a fragile asset. Once a rumor attaches itself to a name, it can follow a person throughout their career and into private relationships. Even when allegations never become legal claims, they can damage careers, strain relationships, and produce long-lasting psychological effects. Consider the artists, managers, publicists, and family members dragged into the orbit of rumor without evidence. Consider the employees of companies like Tidal or Roc Nation who must manage both internal morale and public narratives. Consider the mutual friends who must choose sides or attempt to mediate behind closed doors. The cost is not only reputational, it is personal. Can the public remember the people behind the personas when outrage is the currency of conversation? And if not, what ethical obligations do we abdicate? ## the quiet councillors. Amid the chaos, private conversations proliferated. Insiders exchanged encrypted messages. Lawyers and publicists whispered contingency plans. Executives convened to consider potential legal exposure, potential PR responses, and the business implications. The rumor mill had an interior life that the public could not see, populated by risk assessments and crisis playbooks. It would be naive to assume that these private conversations had no effect. They likely shaped the public silence of certain parties. A decision to remain quiet can be as much the result of counsel as of strategy. Silence, therefore, can be a counsel-driven posture rather than a moral stance. What trade-offs are executives and artists willing to make when the stakes include not only money but legacy? How does the calculus of risk adjust when the alternative to silence is potentially self-immolation in the court of public opinion? ## rituals of allegiance and withdrawal. The industry responded not only in soundbites but in rituals. Award show shoutouts, curated playlists, and the quiet unfollowing of social accounts. In a world where gestures are code, a single retweet or omission can function as a public judgment. Beyoncé's fans, for instance, mobilized defensively, interpreting the insinuations that implicated her as attacks on a beloved cultural icon. Their reaction was both protective and performative, a modern form of allegiance. Meanwhile, other performers issued more guarded statements about misinformation and the need for due process. Do these gestures matter? Yes. They are the cultural rituals that reinscribe belonging. They are also a measure of the industry's power to rally or to isolate. ## what accountants and historians share. If lawyers and PR teams live in the present, accountants and historians live in the ledger and the archive. For accountants, the dispute is often reducible to numbers: streaming revenues, ownership percentages, and contract language. What determines who gets paid in the age of streaming is messy and often opaque, and disputes about compensation are rarely reducible to emotive social media claims. Historians, on the other hand, care about narratives and who gets to author them. The way the public story is told today will affect archival materials, biographies, and the cultural memory attached to each artist. That is why legacy battles are not merely pettiness. They are fights over the textual and material record that will frame future understanding. In the long run, who controls the narrative may matter more than who controlled the dollars in a single fiscal year. ## the unfinished chorus. By the morning after Grammy night, the crisis had not resolved. The posts remained. The silence remained. New layers of commentary were added daily. Each day introduced new moral hypotheses without corresponding legal anchors. The internet's appetite for story kept refueling the same fire. At stake were not only reputations but also broader social questions. How power flows in entertainment, how institutions absorb or deflect accountability, and how audiences, hungry for moral clarity, manage ambiguity. The saga raises practical questions with no easy answers. How should streaming platforms be regulated to ensure fair artist compensation? How should corporate structures be designed to protect brand and artist alike without concentrating power? How can the law adapt to disputes that start as social media storms and then either fizzle or smolder indefinitely? ### a few speculative postures. We can imagine several plausible scenarios that might explain why the conflict played out as it did. 1. The strategic provocation. The social media posts were an attempt to force leverage. By making explosive claims public, the poster hoped to change the negotiation field. 2. Emotional venting. The posts were a form of catharsis, a way to voice long-simmering grievances in a manner that bypassed slow-moving institutions. 3. Attention as currency. Recognizing the economics of attention, the posts were designed to generate an irresistible media cycle that would, paradoxically, pressure institutions to act. 4. A mix of all three, real human grievance, strategic calculation, and attention economics often overlap. It may not be necessary to choose one cause when several are plausible. Which of these shapes best fits reality? The public cannot reliably say without direct testimony, documents, or litigation. And yet public narratives persist nonetheless. ## questions that refuse easy answers. The story cannot be fully told without asking sharper questions, ones that point to systems rather than personalities. Asterisk when a star accuses a titan and the titan refuses to engage, what does that silence do to public trust in institutions? Does inaction signal immunity or restraint? Asterisk how does the architecture of streaming and ownership create incentives that reward silence and consolidation over transparency and redistribution? Asterisk at what point does fandom cross the line from support to delusion? And how can communities hold their icons accountable without turning to rumor as evidence? Asterisk what responsibility do platforms, journalists, and corporations have to slow the spread of unverified claims without chilling legitimate whistleblowing? These questions do not yield tidy policy prescriptions. They are moral and structural dilemmas that will shape the industry's future. ## the long view. Many moments of cultural rupture recede into pattern and precedent. A scandal burns bright, then cools into a set of practices, inequalities, and institutional memories. In 5 years, this fight will likely be a footnote in longer biographies and industry histories, but the dynamics it exposed may remain. If the industry wishes to change, it needs mechanisms that allow grievances to be aired without instant global trial by social media. This might mean stronger contractual transparency, better dispute resolution mechanisms that guarantee confidentiality without shielding wrongdoing, and more robust support for those with legitimate claims. But structural change requires political will. Who holds that power? Often the same institutions that benefit from the status quo. ## final coda. On voice, power, and the right to be heard. The original spark of this saga was not the accusation itself but the sense that an artist felt unheard, denied compensation, denied recognition, denied control over a narrative she helped create. That basic human grievance is the heart of why the story resonated beyond gossip circuits. People identified with the desire to be seen and acknowledged. The darker part of the tale is the method. When visibility becomes the lever, speech can be weaponized. The weaponization of voice in a hyper-connected world creates collateral damage, reputations, legal exposure, and fractured communities. It also invites a question that is as old as public life. When institutions fail to provide channels for redress, what recourses should those who feel aggrieved take? Ultimately, the saga left more questions than answers. It forced a confession about the fragility of modern celebrity, That prominence can be both a shield and a target, that ownership and legacy matter as much as applause, and that silence, whether chosen or imposed, can function as both armor and enigma. Who will write the final line of this chapter? Will it be legal documents, future memoirs, industry reforms, or simply the forgetting and normalization of yet another social media eruption? Perhaps the more important question is not who wins the argument, but whether the industry learns how to listen before the next explosion.